Kaya ninyong mag-Facebook, kung kaya ninyong mag-TikTok, mag-Instagram, kaya ninyong panoorin itong vlog na ito, walang dahilan na hindi nyo kakayanin na mag-register online. Katapos ko lang nung aking second dose ng Sinovac. Wala namang side effect. Ang payo ko talaga sa inyong lahat, wag na kayong mamili kung ano yung meron, kunin nyo na.
While countries around the world continue to mobilize to contain the spread of COVID-19, mental health experts say we can't lose sight of an equally alarming issue: the long-term mental health impact the pandemic is going to leave on society.
What I think we're facing here is a very traumatic event for a lot of people. It's a traumatic societal event for people. And one thing that we know about trauma is that while it's happening, you do whatever you can do to survive. You bear down and you just get through it, which is what we're all trying to do right now. I think that we're still very much in the trauma phase, the active trauma phase of this pandemic.
But what happens after physical distancing measures are lifted? What comes after the pandemic is over and people are able to get back to whatever their normal may be?
There's going to be residual stress, depression, certainly financial pressures, learning how to re-engage with the world in this new way. That's going to be difficult for a lot of people, and those are exactly the kinds of risk factors that lead to increasing rates of depression, anxiety, and even suicide.
The rapid spread of the pandemic gave little chance to prepare for or even process all that has happened in terms of job losses and the complete uprooting of everyday life and relationships. A large body of scientific studies show that there is a close relationship between indicators such as unemployment, mental health, and suicide. Henning explains there is a peak and a valley response in our nervous system faced with trauma. Right now, we are at a peak in which we are engaging with the immediate threat of the pandemic. You go into survival mode, which can be very taxing on a person's mental health.
And in fact, it doesn't actually let you think through or process what's happening to you. Its only interest is in keeping you alive and keeping you safe.
Once the pandemic is over, there will be a valley in which we recover from that threat. But the problem is, going back to baseline without support can take a lot longer than we may think. After the threat passes, Hennig says people can start to retreat or fall into depression or find many other ways of dissociating themselves with the trauma they experienced.
It can really become almost an infection on its own. Some people stay stuck either way at the top of that peak, or they stay stuck down at the bottom, or anywhere in between. Not everybody returns to baseline, and that's where we become concerned about mental illness. I think it's important for employers in particular to realize when we start to loosen some of the restrictions that we're currently facing, that this needs to happen slowly, that we can't go back to the way the world was overnight.
In towns and cities, usually busy streets remain empty, a scenario set to continue as scientists warn that any relaxation of the lockdown would risk killing tens of thousands more people. The government insists on moving very carefully.
We'll end up moving to a new normal, and I think we will need to make sure that we can proceed in a sure-footed way, which is why I know the temptation to start announcing proposals now, but actually until you've got the evidence, that's not responsible. It risks you ending up misleading. I know you're not going to, but we need to take a sure-footed step forward which protects life but also preserves our way of life.
The key measure that all governments are worrying about is the rate of infection. A month ago in the UK, it was about 3, which means that anyone infected could pass it to 3 others. Since then, it's come right down to something like 0.7, crucially below the line of 1. Anything above that, and the virus takes off again. So what about the effect of easing some of the restrictions? Well, allowing public gatherings again would probably take you above that key line. But reopening schools might be possible and still stay below it. But no one's entirely sure.
In the car park of a baseball stadium on the outskirts of Seoul, they queue for a coronavirus test. This is one of dozens of drive-thrus across South Korea, where from the safety of your car, you can be tested for COVID-19. It takes just a matter of minutes, and results are available within 24 hours. Almost 500,000 people in the country have now gone through this process. After inventing the drive-through, a walk-through version was later created, and together they form part of the most accessible and extensive testing strategy in the world. Up to 20,000 people a day can find out whether they have got the virus or not.
환자분이 이제 검사를 받으러 온 숫자는 보통 오전에 30-40명, 오후에도 30-40명. 그래서 하루에 총 70명에서 80명 가량 내원을 하고 있습니다.
South Korea's trace, test and treat approach was rolled out within days of its first confirmed cases. Just over 2 weeks later, it levelled off an outbreak centred on thousands of infections from a church congregation. The government had fast-tracked test kits into mass production.
계속적으로 이제 어쨌든 선별진료소는 방역의 최일선에 있기 때문에 계속적으로 저희가 이거에 대해서 방역의 최선을 다하고 있지만 최근에 또 입국자에 대한 강화나 이런 부분들이 되면서 보건소에서도 인력을 충원해서 지금 대처하고 있는 중입니다.
While other countries, including the UK, question the accuracy, feasibility and value of testing on this kind of scale, South Korea is sticking to a system which so far is proving a success. Debbie Edward, News at 10.
While the lockdown remains firmly in place in France, in Spain it has been partially relaxed. Workers in the manufacturing and construction industries were allowed back to work today, and the police were handing out masks at Madrid's metro stations. The lockdown here has brought economic collapse perilously close, and so the government has brought building sites back to life. But in the midst of the pandemic, any reopening of business has to be done extremely carefully.
Well, there's two things. When you open it slowly at a time, you can at least shut it if the decision has been incorrect. It also allows you, with smaller numbers, to measure the consequences of having opened it. How many new additional cases do I generate as a result of lifting the shutdown?
Italy will start opening some shops like bookstores and stationers from tomorrow. In Austria, meanwhile, it'll be DIY stores and garden centres. And in Denmark, schools and nurseries will reopen from